All right, we are on the 32nd Sutra. We're starting the rules. We just did the commandments. And we're in the means. So we're in the means, moved on from the commandments into the rules. This should be interesting. Internal and external purification, contentment, fiery aspiration, spiritual reading, and devotion to Ishvara constitutes Nijama, or the 5 rules. As said above, these 5 rules govern the life of the lower personal self and form the basis of character. The yoga practices which so much interest the Western thinker and aspirant, and which lure him on with their apparent ease of accomplishment and richness of award, such as psychic unfoldment, are not permitted by the true guru or teacher until yama or nijama have been established as controlling factors in the daily life of the disciple. The commandments and the rules must first be kept, and when his outer conduct to his fellow men and his inner discipline of life is brought into line with these requirements, then he can safely proceed with the forms and rituals of practical yoga, but not till then. It is the failure to recognize this that leads to so much of the trouble among students of yoga in the West. There is no better basis for the work of Eastern occultism than strict adherence to the requirements laid down by the master of all the masters in the Sermon on the Mount, and the self-disciplined Christian pledged to purity of life and unselfish service. Can take up, I'm sorry, I messed that up there. There's no better basis for the work of Eastern occultism than strict adherence to the requirements laid down by the master of all the masters in the Sermon on the Mount, and the self-disciplined Christian pledged to purity of life and unselfish service can take up the practice of yoga much more safely than his more worldly and selfish yet intellectual brother. I didn't read that properly again, I don't think, but I missed this part right here. So we're going to keep going. He will not run the risks that his unprepared brother takes. So, we have to prepare ourselves. It's pretty cut and dry. The words internal and external purity relate to the 3 sheaths in which the self is veiled. It must be interpreted in a dual sense. Every sheath has its densest and most tangible form, and this must be kept clean, for there is a sense in which the astral and mental bodies can be kept cleansed from impurities coming to them from their environment, just as the physical body must be kept cleansed from similar impurities. The subtler matters of those bodies must be kept equally cleansed, and this is the basis of that study of magnetic purity, which is the cause of so many observances in the East which seem inexplicable to the Westerner. A shadow cast upon food by a foreigner produces impure conditions. This is based upon the belief that certain types of force emanations produce impure conditions, and though the method of counteracting these conditions may savor a dead letter ritual, yet the thought back to the observance remains still the truth. So little is as yet known about force emanations from the human being or acting upon the human mechanism that what may be called scientific purification is as yet in its infancy. Well, that's very deep there. I can't even speak to that. A shadow cast upon food by a foreigner. And I don't know if that's meant literally. I doubt it. Seems like that it would be more in the esoteric terms. Contentment is productive of conditions wherein the mind is at rest. It is based upon the recognition of the laws governing life and primarily the law of karma. It produces a state of mind wherein all conditions are regarded as correct and just, and those in which the aspirant can best work out his problem and achieve the goal for any specific life. This does not entail a settling down and an acquiescence producing inertia, but a recognition of present assets and availing oneself of one's opportunities and letting them form a background and basis for all future progress. When this is done rightly, the three remaining rules can be more easily kept. Next is fiery aspiration. Will be dealt with more fully in the next book, but it is well to point out here that this quality of going forth towards the ideal or of straining towards the objective must be so profound in the aspirant to yoga that no difficulties can turn him back. Only when this quality has been developed and proved, and when it is found that no problem, no darkness, and no time element can hinder, is a man permitted to become the disciple of some master. Fiery effort, steady, persistent longing, and enduring faithfulness to the ideal vision are the, I don't know how to say that, of discipleship. Let's see. Give me just 1 second here. Where? Sorry about that. Let's see.
Sine qua non.
Sine qua non.
Sine qua non.
An essential condition, a thing that is absolutely necessary. Okay, now we know. Are they absolutely necessary? The conditions absolutely necessary to discipleship. These characteristics must be found in all three bodies, leading to the constant disciplining of the physical vehicle, the steady orientation of the emotional nature, and the mental attitude which enables a man to count all things but loss if he can only arrive at his goal. And, you know, and the Master DK and Alice Bailey, they would say at some point that there's no turning back. So you couldn't pull your application, even if you thought you could. So the process goes forward, and you will become more and more fiery, and your aspiration will become more fiery. Your contentment will increase. You will become pure. We are doing spiritual reading, and we'll continue to do that. And then there is, you know, this devotion is increasing all the time. And so let's keep going with this spiritual reading here. Spiritual reading will be found to concern the development of the sense of subjective realities. It is fostered by study as understood in the physical sense and by the endeavor to arrive at the thoughts which words convey. Right. This is not Yeah, this is an interesting thing because our tendency is to want to understand what we're reading. That's not how this goes. You're not going to be able to understand the text. We have, after it's assimilated, and after we invoke it and the evocation of it comes, we have the thoughts. We arrive at the thoughts which the words were conveying. It's such a different thing than what we're used to and the learning that we've done in this, on earth and tried to, in our schoolwork and such. It's a completely different type of learning. It is developed by a close scrutiny of the causes which lie back of all desires, aspirations, and feelings, and thus is related to the desire or astral plane. It deals with the reading of symbols and geometrical forms, ensouling an idea or thought, and this concerns the mental plane. This will be dealt with later in book 3. So again, we've got the emotional plane and we've got the mental plane. Our goal is to get permanently off of the astral plane and be polarized on the mental plane. And we're looking at symbols there and meanings. We're looking at meaning, and we're attempting to arrive at the thoughts which the words convey, so that brings some level of understanding. It's not for, and let me see if I can put this into context. It's not for you to tell somebody, hey, devotion to Ishvara may be briefly stated to constitute the attitude of the lower threefold self to the service of the ego, the inner self, the God, or Christ within. That is not what we're trying to do. Why are you reading them? Why are we reading this, right? We're not reading it to remember this. We're reading it to gain the understanding. So all we're really doing is absorbing the material. There's no reason to try to grasp it and hold on to it. That's not what's going on. So let's go to this devotion to Ishvara. So we talked about spiritual reading. Devotion to Ishvara, which is the soul, may be briefly stated to constitute the attitude of the lower threefold self, right? Lower threefold self, to the service of the ego, which is sitting right here, because we're looking at the mental unit, the astral body, and the physical. The inner rower, the God or Christ within. This will be triple in its manifestation, bringing that lower personal self into a life of obedience to the master within the heart, eventually bringing the aspirant into the group of some adept or spiritual teacher and leading him also into devoted service to Ishvara, or the divine self as found in the hearts of all men and back of all forms of divine manifestation. Let's continue on to 33. The 33rd Sutra. I don't know why I say that. I just keep doing it. So forgive me for that silliness. When thoughts which are contrary to yoga are present, there should be the cultivation of their opposite. And right out the gate, this sounds like something we learned very early when we think about, changing negativity into positivity, and using affirmations essentially. let's see, the translation by Johnson gives the same idea in very beautiful words, and the method is adequately brought out. He says, when transgressions hinder, the weight of the imagination should be thrown upon the opposite side. Oh, yeah, exactly. So we know this. I'm sure we all are familiar with the need to transmute all negative energy. That is not something that we allow to hang around. It's not something we really can put up with, because there is aversion, and we need to avoid aversion too, essentially. Attraction, we don't want, there to be that an attraction to the negativity, and we also don't want there to be an aversion to it, so we get rid of it. And then we walk the middle way. Let's see what he says. Let's see what Johnson says here. When transgressions hinder, the weight of the imagination should be thrown upon the opposite. Okay, that's what he said. All right, easy enough. The entire science of the balancing of the pairs of opposites is given in these two translations, neither one being fully complete without the other. It is often difficult to translate the ancient Sanskrit terms by one word or phrase, for in that language, a term will stand for an entire idea and will require several phases in order to convey the true meaning in more limited English tongue. Certain basic concepts are embodied in this sutra, and for the sake of clarity might be tabulated as follows. As a man thinketh, so he is, or so is he, and as soon as I hear that, I think, energy follows thought as well, too. So, but that which works out into physical objectivity is always a thought, and according to that thought or idea, so will be the form and life purpose. Thoughts are of two kinds, those tending to form building, to limitation, to physical plane expression, those tending away from the lower three planes, and therefore from the form aspect as we know it in the three worlds, and leading to union, yoga, or at one-ment with the soul, the Christ aspect. When it is found that the thoughts habitually cultivated are productive of astral and physical reactions and results, it must be realized that they are inimical to yoga. They hinder the at-one-in process, and certainly all this nonsense is hindrance. We must be as aware as possible, if I am allowed to have my 2 cents. Contrary thoughts to these must then be cultivated. These can be easily ascertained, for they will be the direct opposite of the inhibiting thoughts. Okay, very interesting. The direct opposite. That's great. The cultivation of the thoughts which will tend to yoga and lead a man to knowledge of his real self and consequent union with that self involves a triple process. A, the new thought concept, definitely formulated and found to be contrary to the old thought current, must be ascertained and considered. 1,000,000%, once we get on this path, we are not going to be thinking anything like we were thinking before after a while. B, the use of the imagination comes next in order to bring the thought into manifestation. This is part of the process, but I would say that many have really incredible imaginations, so that may not be something to focus on anymore. This brings in the realm of desire, and consequently the astral or emotional body is affected. We're trying to transcend we're leaving the astral behind at this point. And DK says later on that most aspirants now are kama monastic, which means we can leave that behind. We can move past the astral plane and take the second initiation. As far as that's what I understand. He says many will take it in this during this time. Then follows definite visualization of the effect of that which has been thought and imagined as it will manifest in the physical plane of life. This will be found to generate energy. This means consequently that the etheric body becomes vitalized or energized by the new thought current, and certain transformations and reorganizations take place, which eventually cause a complete change in the activities of the physical plane man. The constant cultivation of this affects an entire transformation in the threefold lower man, and eventually the truth of the Christian phraseology becomes apparent. Only Christ is seen and heard. Only the real or spiritual man can be seen expressing himself through a physical medium, as Christ did through his instrument and disciple Jesus. This may not be something that you've heard before. I don't know. I do believe this was discussed from Bethlehem to Calvary and the reappearance of the Christ, but the Christ used Jesus. Jesus and the Christ were not exactly the same. Jesus is the disciple to the Christ, became Christ, and Christ manifested at the cross. That's something we should study, though, certainly. All right, let's. This is great stuff. There are these. It really works. We're explaining the process, and this is important. All right, the 34th Sutra. Thoughts contrary to yoga are harmfulness, falsehood, theft, incontinence, and avarice, whether committed personally, caused to be committed, or approved of. That's big. Whether arising from avarice, anger, or delusion, which is ignorance, whether slight in the doing, middling, or great. These results have always in excessive pain, always in excessive pain and ignorance. For this reason, the contrary thought must be cultivated. We really have to guard our thoughts, and that's said many times over. We really have to be careful about what we go along with, what we allow to run away, our minds to run away with. Let's read this. It will be noted that the 5 commandments deal specifically with those thoughts contrary to yoga or union, and that the keeping of the commandments will bring about A, harmlessness instead of harmfulness, B, truth instead of falsehood, C, abstention from theft instead of stealing, D, self-control instead of incontinence, and E, contentment instead of avarice or covetousness. No excuse is left to the aspirant, and the truth is born and on him that transgression of the commandments is equally productive of results, whether the violation is trifling or very great. The contrary thought must produce its effect, and the effect is dual, pain and ignorance or delusion. There are 3 words which the occult student associates ever with the 3 worlds. There are the 3: pain, ignorance, and delusion. And, I want to say what happens is, and I found this is in my North Node, which Carla had done a reading for the North Node. And it says that there will be a guaranteed built-in pain every time I am selfish in this life. It's guaranteed now, and what I mean is it's guaranteed built in. So I experienced this, and I've always experienced it, and I didn't understand it until until I had gotten my nodes and I looked at it in the face, and then I realized, oh my gosh, that is absolutely the truth. But no excuses left. The truth is born on him, that transgression of these commandments that we're talking about through here. Now, this is not a religion, right? This is not specific to any certain thing. This is just life. These commandments are not something written somewhere that we have to, it doesn't matter. These are actions. So whether the violation is trifling or very great, we're going to pay. There's going to be a pain penalty for this until we are brought into accord, until things have worked through. I forget the term I'm looking for there. Fastened, I think is a biblical term. But until we come around, we're gonna feel it. So no reason to fight it. Just really go to the opposite right away. I've made it. I mean, honestly, I think probably all of us, because we have to experiment, made every mistake. So we know all of this to be true. I've probably made more mistakes than others. Because that's just, apparently I have to be more sure of myself than necessary. But anyway. All right, so let's go into those 3 words. There are 3 words which the occult student associates ever with the 3 worlds. Maya, or illusion, having reference to the world of forms in which the true self finds itself when in incarnation, and with which it ignorantly identifies itself for long aeons. It's just a natural thing, but apparently it's also an unknowing, because ignorant means unknowing, right? So this isn't like being derogatory, like we're stupid or so. Like this is we're missing it, right? We're missing it. Delusion, the process of wrong identification in which the self deludes itself and says, I am the form. And I would reckon to say that most everybody that's following along and studying this material is, around people who are all in this phase still. Certainly. And then we have ignorance or avidya, the result of this wrong identification, and at the same time, the cause of it. And we know, and we've heard many of the sages say the problem is always ignorance. It's always ignorance. That's like the only problem, because at the end of the day, all of these things are, our own. You could call it stupidity in a way. And I've heard even like Ramana Maharshi, the translated, say, it's because we're stupid. That's if it's true, then that's not harmful. Right? I mean, it's It's just a way to look at it all. And we should know that at this point, that in our prior life, we were all really dreaming. So the self is clothed in form. It is deluded in the world of illusion. Every time, however, that thoughts contrary to yoga are knowingly entertained, the self submerges itself still more in the illusory world and adds to the veil of ignorance. Every time that the weight of the imagination is thrown on the side of the real nature of the self and turned away from the world of the not self, the illusion is lessened. Every time that the weight of the imagination is thrown on the side of the real nature of the self and turned away from the world of the not self, the illusion is lessened. The delusion becomes weakened and ignorance is gradually superseded by knowledge. I mean, and if that's equal, oh boy, is it equal? Did it say that? I don't know that it's equal. I don't think it says it, but boy, is that something to ponder on. I think we got the thought of that. The thought behind those words. Let's do 35. And we'll call it there for the day. In the presence of him who has perfected harmlessness, all enmity ceases. This sutra demonstrates to us the working out of a great law. In Book 4, Sutra 17, Patanjali tells us that the perception of a characteristic, of a quality, and of an objective form is dependent upon the fact that in the perceiver similar characteristics, qualities, and objective capacity are to be found. I don't think I read that properly. The perception of a characteristic, of a quality, and of an objective form is dependent upon the fact that in the perceiver similar characteristics, that in the form is dependent upon the fact that in the perceiver similar characteristics, qualities, and objective capacity are to be found. This similarity is the basis of perception. The same truth is hinted at in the first epistle of St. John, where the words are found, "We shall be like him, for we shall see him as he is." Only that can be contacted which is already present or partially present in the perceiver's consciousness. If enmity and hatred are therefore to be found by the perceiver, it is because in him the seeds of enmity and hatred are present. And all right, so let me just throw out something that kind of does correspond to this in a way. Because I've had this conversation, and I want to say from the mental plane that this is very clear. People have said to me, well, what if I go have a drink? I'm just going to have a drink. I don't, or I haven't had a drink for a long time. Maybe I'll go have a drink, and I don't see the big deal. And then we'll have there'll be a conversation about that. Or I just do this, for this reason or that reason or the other thing. And this is the answer right here. If you're doing that, that's where you're at. That's because it's eternity, right? So if in this moment, that's what you're doing, that's where you're at. And all of the things that we just talked about have come into play. all of the ignorance, all of the delusion, all of the pain is coming with it. All the Maya, we wrapped ourselves in Maya. We went to I am the form. We're taking a break from spirituality, essentially. And we're saying, well, I'm the form now. So I'm just going to hang out and be the form. And but in that is a disaster of sorts, right? And then, now we're in ignorance. And now, so as soon as that comes up, we're supposed to go directly to the opposite. We're not supposed to go, oh, well, it's cool if I just go do this for, today. Or I'm just going to go have a couple of drinks, or I'm going to go pretend that I'm going to go delude myself for a while. And then that takes on this whole new thing. And now you doubled up on a problem. We've doubled up. And I think we've all paid the price for that. And if we haven't, we end up paying the price until we recognize that that's true. We shouldn't be doing that, because now we know that if we're doing that, that's the state. That is it. It's always what it is. It is what it is, literally. And it's hard to, to recognize that sometimes. All right. So anyway, I didn't mean to go off too far there. If enmity and hatred are therefore to be found by the perceiver, it's because in him the seeds of enmity and hatred are present. So if you were doing these things, then those things are still present and they still have an attraction. And they're still pulling us. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing it. When they are absent, naught but unity and harmony exists. This is the first stage of universal love, the practical endeavor on the part of the aspirant to be at one with all beings. He begins with himself and sees to it that the seeds of harmfulness in his own nature are eradicated. He deals, therefore, with the cause which produces enmity towards him and others. Right. We recognize it's our problem, and then we fix ourselves, and then we don't try to fix anybody else. That's not even appropriate. Right? The natural result is that he is at peace and others are at peace with him. And we learn these lessons as we go, for sure. Right? And then the next thing you know, your environment is very comfortable and relaxed, and it remains that way. And if you step outside of that and fall into ignorance, then you find that you jacked your environment and now you're paying the price. And that's how we learn. Experiment, experience, and then express these things. That's DK's words there. So in his presence, even wild beasts are rendered impotent, and this by the condition of the mind state of the aspirant or yogi, because we're not in that. We're not worried about it. It's just you're inviting at that point. You can do essentially no harm to anyone in that state, and it's beneficial for everyone to be around you. All right, I think we're going to leave it there for today. That was a nice short study. I think it's good stuff. There's a lot of secrets in there. I would say that this is an important read for all of us. No doubt, this is what we were led to study right now. So this is really good, and it does build on Glamour and the previous books that we were reading. Almost perfectly. So I think we're doing something right here. All right, we'll be back at it tomorrow. Have a good one.